Jennifer, if you'll proceed. I believe we're missing one vote, I believe. There, thank you, Jennifer. 8-1, that council member in opposition, Council Member Benavente. All right, City Manager, let's move to the Youth Protection Ordinance, please.
You can real quickly. We do have one remaining item from the last item we talked about. We can circle back after this to clean up this $500,000.
Right, did we receive consensus from council on the
You added it? We're good, thank you, thank you. Yes, sir, this will be presented by Chief Braden. Thank you, Sheila.
Chief Braden, you have the floor.
So Attorney White will help me present tonight. We'll bring before you a draft for the Youth Protection Ordinance.
While they're pulling that up, Mayor Pro Tem and members of council, tonight we have in front of you a youth curfew proposal. It is open for council's discussion, deliberation, and direction of staff. As you probably all know, it has been talked about at different times in the city. I think what was reported to me back in 2014, which was a time when I was not in the city at that point. And the council, after some discussion, opted not to enact it at that point in time. Since 2014, and I think this is something that I know many of the council members have also discussed, which is, along with the chief, about the concerns about youth and juvenile violence and crime issues. It is back before you, as the chief had indicated at one of his reports, that he wanted the council to consider it. And it is he and Attorney White are here to present it. But again, we will look forward to a robust discussion from council and direction from you as to how you'd like to proceed after the presentation.
Good evening, council. Before you is a proposed youth curfew ordinance. We've inserted into section 17 at the very end, so it would be section 17-34. This proposed ordinance copies pretty much exactly the ordinance that currently in place for Cumberland County. The reason we did it that way is so that there would be no confusion in the times. It would be the same as the youth in the county. There would be no confusion on people's part on which one, what times were in place, because the city would be exactly the same as the county. So to give you a brief overview, the state law that allows us to do this is 160A-198, which is basically the authority to adopt ordinances imposing a curfew on persons of any age less than 18. The ordinance splits up juveniles between 16 and 17, gives them one time, and for any juveniles that are under the age of 16, there's a different time. The time limit for minors would be between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. on Saturday, between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. on Sunday, and raising the time limit by an hour to midnight and 5 a.m. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That would be for any minor under the age of 18. So that would be 16 and 17 in the definition in the proposed ordinance. The time limits for juveniles under 16 would be 11 p.m. on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday to 6 a.m. the following day. There would also be a curfew limitation of sorts on juveniles during the time period that school is in. So that would be 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. for any juveniles that have been suspended from school or have failed to attend. There is also a portion of this for a parent or guardian to take custody of the juvenile, and if they refuse to do so, they could be held under the last portion for the same penalty. There's a number of exceptions, 10, that would allow juveniles to do certain things during these time periods, exceptions. The biggest one is anytime they're accompanied by a parent or guardian, they would not be subjected to this ordinance. If they're accompanied by an adult 19 years age or older and authorized by their parent or guardian, if they're on an errand with a direct route, if they're going to and from a school-sanctioned function, if they're going to and from employment, or responding to an emergency. There's also a section that would allow the chief of police or his designee to issue a special permit to the juveniles. And there's exceptions for the owner or operator of an employee of establishment that allows a juvenile to stay in there. There's the enforcement portion of this. And then there is that the law enforcement officer shall not prepare a juvenile arrest report, issue a citation, or make an arrest under this article unless that officer reasonably believes that an offense has occurred based on any response or other circumstances and that no exception or defense is present. So that the law enforcement officer will take steps to determine if any of those 10 exceptions actually apply. And then you have the penalties section, which is that any juvenile who violates the ordinance would be subject to a delinquency proceeding, and the delinquency proceedings are contained within the statutes and tell how to proceed after that. And this would be considered one of the lowest level of offenses determined by the juvenile's previous history.
So basically, this was drafted based on, multiple questions over the past several weeks about what we could do to address some of the crime issues we're experiencing across the city. Violent crime is number one on the list, but we've also been through a recent event of larceny of motor vehicles. 3 weeks ago, we had 30 vehicles stolen in 1 week, based on the Kias, the Hyundais, and those trends that are across the nation. We know that recently we had a group of 9 juveniles who were arrested for charges, an array of charges in relation to those motor vehicle B&Es and thefts. And we realize that juveniles play a significant part in those motor vehicle thefts across our city. So I understand that this is not going to be a one tool that fixes all of the crime problems as they relate to juveniles within our community. But it is a tool that would give us access to inquire as to what these kids are doing out when they're out at 1 o'clock in the morning, out at 2 o'clock in the morning, walking some of these apartment complexes, these neighborhoods that have been plagued with some of these crimes. So it also bears to the fact that the questions were asked about responsibilities of the parents. One of the things that would automatically happen if we encounter a juvenile who was unintended and in violation of the curfew, we would contact their parents. They'd have to be released to a responsible adult as part of this juvenile curfew. So it gives us some ability to identify who the parents are, who's responsible for this child, and turn them over. And if there's appropriate charges or any types of contributing to the delinquency that may be added to that, it gives us opportunity to investigate those things. Again, we understand that this is just a tool. This is not going to solve all the problems that as they relate to juvenile crime, whether it's violent crime or some of the trends that we're seeing. But it's just an option that is presented to you as a council for your to take a look at and decide if this is something that's appropriate for our city at this time.
Thank you, Chief. We do have some questions. Councilmember Benavente, and then Banks McLaughlin, Councilmember Banks McLaughlin, and then Councilmember Jensen. Councilmember Benavente.
In the process of developing this ordinance, have you found any evidence of efficacy in another area that's included this that says it's reduced youth crime?
Make sure I understand the question. You're asking if we've had success. Is there anywhere I can notate there's been a success?
No, sir. This is an idea that's been exercised since the 90s and in many cities throughout the country, including North Carolina. Have you looked into whether or not any other city that has applied this curfew has seen, by evidence, a reduction in youth crime because of the curfew?
So I go back to what I said earlier. This is not the one tool fixes everything.
I understand, but does it have any impact at all on reducing youth crime? Have you found any evidence of any other city that's instituted a youth curfew and you've seen evidence of youth crime going down?
I may, just in doing research on juvenile curfews kind of in general, not necessarily North Carolina specific, there's been a number of articles as there are different places across the United States that are attempting to do this. One of those being like Washington, D.C., and various other locations. Now, just anecdotally.
No. I'm talking about actual evidence, not anecdotes of where it's been installed, but evidence, because they've done it for years in some of these cities. Do they have any evidence to show that it had an impact in bringing youth crime down? Do you have any actual evidence of that?
No, I don't have any evidence.
Thank you. I have another question here. Having reviewed all that data, have you seen evidence that shows, in fact, that it's harmed young people and that we've contributed to a school-to-prison pipeline with such curfews? Do you see any evidence out there of that?
No, I did not find it.
Okay. I provided some to the city manager. City manager, did you get a chance to review some of the studies that have been done throughout the country by academics, by law schools, into youth curfews and whether or not there's any efficacy to these types of curfews?
I did not have a chance to review the material that you sent me, but I would, if I can jump on one portion. As the conversations that you and I had, most of us in the room grew up with a curfew. And when we look at what the curfew does, I was one of those that I had to be told by my mom, I don't want you to be calling me at 12 o'clock from Myrtle Beach. I don't want you to be driving home from Myrtle Beach. You are to be in the house with the doors locked at 12 o'clock.
And I think that you're very lucky to have had a parent who cared about you that way.
I'm making a long-winded point. I apologize. But the point is that it's not just the children who might be involved in crime. It's also the children who would not be the victims of crime. And so I think, but there is no scientific evidence that I found that, to answer your question.
In 2014, Chief Medlock at the time was presented with the same question that you've been presented, sir. How do we deal with youth violence? And a curfew was asked about. Are you familiar with the evidence that he provided to the council during that time?
I'm familiar with his response.
What are some things that he looked into?
He looked in, my recollection when I was brought to my attention was he cited that most of the youth crime at that point in time was committed during the daytime.
And in fact, he reviewed 2 years of crime data to come to that determination. Is that correct?
I'm not exactly sure, but yes.
I think the Fayetteville Observer reported that. Why haven't you brought the same kind of crime data to us before we can make a decision on the same matter?
Because I'm going based on my real world experience.
Okay.
Okay, the other night I was out and I had over a dozen juveniles at a shooting incident within the crime scene tape. That is the real world experience that I'm bringing to this right now. I cited earlier, we had a week where we had 30 vehicles stolen and we arrested over 9 juveniles in association with those motor vehicle thefts. That's the real world citation that I'm using today as opposed to decade-old data.
City Manager, we just had a lot of presentation on pros and cons when it comes to dams and infrastructure. Where are the pros and cons and the data on this issue that could impact a lot of young people in this community?
As I said when we opened this up, this is for the council to decide whether you would like for us to move forward. You have clearly articulated that there is a mixed reviews about whether curfews have an impact. We don't have the benefit of forward longitudinal data. The review that it sounds like Chief Medlock did was looking back over 2 years at when the crime occurred during the day. But that information that you requested, and you requested some of it today, and we will get that to you and the council as soon as we can. But what would be very beneficial for the staff, as well as I think for the council, would be if there are other elements of information that you want to consider or would like for us to present, if y'all could let us know what that is.
Mayor Pro Tem, this is my very last question. Thank you, Mr. Manager. What other stakeholders have you connected with? I've spoken with some folks at the Cumberland County Courthouse, and not all of them, but the PD's office, the District Attorney's office, even the NAACP, my goodness. Have you reached out to any of these groups to get some feedback from them about how this ordinance would impact their work?
That would be because there are juvenile offenses. Number one, they would go through the DJJ, and we talked about some of the applications for who we have to partner with. DJJ and Department of Social Services were the ones that were mostly impacted by any adverse effects of the actual ordinance. If we were unable to contact parents, we probably have to get a hold of the DSS to take care, custody, and control of those children, and any prosecution of any of the crimes that have to go through the Department of Juvenile Justice.
So then walk me through it. You walk up to a young person who you suspect is underage. It's 11 o'clock, maybe it's after midnight, and somebody who may or may not be 22, 23, 24, if they look young, you're going to have to find out. After you approach them, you find out they're underage, and they don't have an excuse. What happens next?
So then we attempt to contact a guardian or parent for that individual, and they'd be turned over to that parent or guardian, and a report would be taken, and it would be determined whether a juvenile petition would be forthcoming or worth pursuing.
What if no parent
All right.
answers?
Last question, Councilmember.
Yeah,
Bennett.
thank you. And if no parent answers that call, where is that young person being held?
They would be under our custody and control until, if there's ultimately no parent at all, it would be turned over to the DSS.
But you arrested this kid, you put him in the back of a car, you take him to the local jail, the local police station?
No, we don't arrest them. They're in the care, custody, and control of the Fayetteville Police Department until we turn them over to a guardian, parent, or social services.
So just
All
sitting
right.
in the
Thank
lobby?
you, Councilmember Benavente. Councilmember Banks McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Chief, for even taking the initiative to try to resolve. Just like you mentioned, this is not a only solution, it's just one of many. Let's be honest, teens should not be out, especially on a weekday, at midnight, not even 11 o'clock. They should be at home, sleep, preparing for school the next day. Second of all, I think we need to more focus on, are we gonna help? Is this gonna be more helpful to our community as far as keeping our community safe, one solution, or will this bring more harm? And I think that this would bring, it'll be more helpful to our community. I would recommend that we possibly do a pilot just to see what happens. There are several cities and states that are implementing these initiatives. But the only question that I do have is, how do we anticipate on educating and informing our community if this ordinance is passed, as far as marketing or, just so that the community are aware of what's taking place?
So if you remember, we just had and one of the things I did post as I walked the lines of the Kia Hyundai event that we had last Saturday, I asked people how were they hearing about the things that the Fayetteville Police Department was putting out to our community. We had a lot of feedback from our Facebook page. It was actually covered by our media outlets of what we were doing that day. And then the word of mouth was actually one of the things that was brought up quite frequently as I walked those lines and asked those questions. So we'd probably do the same thing. We'd probably offer some education, some training that we could post out on social media. We could have actual training sessions throughout our community at some of our rec centers. Those are all potential ways that we could roll some of this information out.
And I was going to also recommend that we communicate with our school system and probably have flyers in our rec center so that the students and their parents are aware of this. I think that was the only questions I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Banks McLaughlin.
Thank you.
Those good suggestions. Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. First of all, Chief, thank you for bringing this to us. And so just a few things. As a mom that raised 4 boys, I will say to you, raising a young man in any city, in any place in the United States in 2014 is a completely different ballgame than it is in 2023. And as a mom sitting here, I do not see how I cannot support this. And I just really believe that we are in a different time right now, and we need to all be hands on deck. The one thing that I have the question for, and I don't know if everybody caught this because I didn't know this, and I'm ashamed that I didn't know this. I did not know since 2015 that the county had a curfew. And I don't know if anybody on this diocese knew that. So what I would say is a lot of the people that are upset that this is coming to fruition and it's coming to the diocese here at the city, nobody's upset that it has been in place for almost 8 years. So that is where I am having, I think that we need to say that it is, everybody in the city is in the county, number one. But again, it has been on the books since 2015 in our county. But that's all that I had to say. I agree with Councilmember Banks McLaughlin. I think that the pilot might be the way to go and see how we go. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jensen. Councilmember Ingram.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. First, I want to thank the moms and fathers that I asked to be here tonight, that I also sent this information ahead of time. I know some of them brought their children in and did show express. I also know that there is a mom in the audience who's very impacted by gun violence of her teenage son. So I thank you so much for being here. In situations like this, I have to come from where I've been impacted, okay? I have a family member who murdered one of my classmates right at the courthouse. Killed him with his daughter in the back seat. Rayvon Jordan came in here to that and said, stop the gun violence on youth. He was followed suiting to his best friend being shot and killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he was gunned down at a block party 2 months after he came into council. I wasn't on council then, but this was 2 months after he came into. A council member earlier asked me some questions about ID, and I said, well, I'll be very honest with you. The time that I came up in when I was in high school, I had fun, okay? I did. And I think my senior year in high school, I was pretty much a junior in college because I was always at Fayetteville State trying to party. So I gave him the experience of how me and my friends got pulled over. It was like 2 cars. We all got pulled over. Second car had to get out. Everybody had to line up and call somebody. You was calling your mama, your grandma, or your principal. And at that time, my principal was Jackie Warner. And you also had to deal with your mom, your grandmother, or the principal when you got to school. Miss Warner was not there for it, but she was going to be there for us. So looking at that, and I also know in terms of ID, students get school IDs. Now, I don't know what grades they go down to, but they do get school IDs. So in my perspective, I'm in support of this because I don't want to come from another person that has been impacted. I don't want to see more people be impacted by the gun violence and the murders. We saw a 12-year-old in the company of adults murdered by retaliatory gun violence. So here's my questions. Given the instances of the steps, you said 10 steps, they'll assess if they can be out, they should be out. Is somewhere in there, can we offer a pickup to say, all right, we've said, okay, you can't be here, you need to be calling somebody?
So I think to answer your question, it goes in line with officer discretion. If we are able to contact a parent, they're able to come out, they're able to correct the actions that their child is being accused of, or whether it's just a violation of the ordinance, then it's officer discretion as to how far that goes. That could actually end right then and there with a warning to the parents if so warranted. Or, you know, if it's a repetitive process, they've been in violation 4, 5, 6 times, then it could actually escalate to, you know, the pursuance of the delinquency charges through the court systems and DJJ. So again, it's that officer discretion as to what is the appropriate way to handle the situation at that given time. Just like with any traffic stop, you know, a warning could be issued, but it would have to be reasonable and justified, the actions of the officers, because we're going to look at the body worn cameras. We're going to find out, you know, why were they out there, you know, and do those reviews that we do on every other stop.
Okay, and so
All
I'm
right.
gonna ask that officer
Last
discretion.
question, Councilmember Ingram. You've been going 4 minutes. I'll let him go 4 minutes. I'm letting you go 4 minutes.
I'm going to ask that, you know, our officers do make sure that they are doing what's right by their rights. Lastly, there did come a question about the fines, which I highly doubt that we might actually get there. And so the question was about low-income families who may not necessarily can pay a fine. And we know, we get fines, that comes into a misdemeanor, and then that becomes into more issues. It becomes first a warning, and then it becomes an actual fine of the $100. So do we have some ways of a parent that I can't afford that? How can we mitigate that? Or is it, once again, discretion?
No, so the imposition of the fine would actually be in the court's discretion. So in this instance, we're solely speaking at this point of a parent getting cited under the ordinance, they would go to court to answer just like any other ordinance violation that's criminal in nature, and the court would choose at that point whether or not a fine was appropriate or not, or some other level of up to $100. So basically, the way the ordinance is written, it could not exceed $100, but it could be something under that in the court's discretion. But that would be up to the court, not the officers.
And just
All
to,
right.
just to follow up, you said that this ordinance was based off of what the county is doing. So what it says is this same whatever they got going on, the county has to still abide by what they're doing. So we're not too out of line.
County
All right.
has to follow their own ordinance.
Got it.
Thank you, Councilmember Ingram. Councilmember McNair.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Chief, thank you. Actually, we've been at this for a long time, trying to come up with some resolution as far as gun violence. But however, everybody knows, and my family knows, that I'm a stickler for structure and order. And it works well for me. But however, I have spoken with some of the citizens in my district, and it brings about some concerns because this is a kind of like difficult subject to talk about because of our children, and we love them, and we don't want anything bad to happen to them. We don't want them charged unfairly. However, I'm gonna go back to the vehicles that were stolen. You didn't give a time frame? Can you give us a time frame?
So yes, most of the vehicles are stolen overnight, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint an actual time of the night when vehicles are stolen in that manner. We have the last known secured, and then we have the report time. And generally, what we figure is that those crimes occur somewhere in between when they parked their car that night or when they got up that morning and figured out it was gone. But we did have several arrests that occurred within or interactions with pursuits of vehicles that were stolen in that 12 to 1 o'clock time frame of the morning.
The ages, like 18 or younger?
I will say this, we just, I think it was part of a press release, we had a total of 9 juveniles that were charged with multiple incidents. I believe that was the actual number is 9, charged over about 40 different incidents of motor vehicle theft.
And I think my other concern is the time, I think the after school time until I think 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Generally, the juveniles are generally in bed at that time or
Well, I can only give you the real-world citations of all the shootings I've done to.
Most of the ones that I know, most of the ones that I know are embedded at that time, so.
And again, that's why I bring up those real-world citations of what I've seen responding to these shooting incidents over the past several weeks. That there are more kids out there at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning than I believe that most people realize.
After school is what I'm really, focusing on. Pretty much. Oh, yeah, one more thing. Will there be a community forum to hear from our citizens about this situation?
So I think, I brought the idea for consideration to council. I think as you move forward, whatever decisions you make, that'll determine how we move forward with the rollout or the implementation of any actual ordinance as it comes forth. I think that is, once you make a decision on what you would like to pursue or see happen in the future, we can make those plans accordingly.
I think it's fair because when we ran our campaign, it was to listen to our citizens. Yes.
Is that it, Councilmember?
That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember McNair. We have Councilmember Thompson Hare, and that will end round one, and then we'll go to round two. But right now, we do not have any type of consensus motion on the floor. Councilmember Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. First, Chief, let me thank you for the Kia and Hyundai refurbish you did over the weekend in collaboration with Manor Church. That's just another way of keeping our community safe. And for all those who have doubt or concerns or second thoughts, just take note that if nothing changes, nothing changes. So we need to do something to make sure we're keeping our youth protected and crime-free. But as I was doing a lot of research, I came across a show on Friday night of Crime in America. I don't know who all had an opportunity to see it, but they had 4 of the mayors who had the highest crime in the country. I'm gonna give you the top 2. Mayor Scott out of Little Rock, Arkansas, at 145% increase in crime. And Durham, number 1, 175% increase in crime.
Thank you, Councilmember Thompson. Councilmember Hare.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and my fellow council members. I knew wherever they were going. And the first thing that we did was just look at each other. We didn't say anything because we knew right then that those children should not have been on outside at that time of night. Now, we have experience with children. I'm a father of 5 girls, and I was with children. Never will something that's being proposed tonight, and I do understand the proposal, is it going to be something that's going to fix everything? As I tell my residents every meeting, another tool to help do what it is that we need to do. Not one tool curb some of the violence being perpetrated.
Motion by
Consensus motion.
Councilmember Hare, is there a second? Well, the second by Councilmember Thompson. Councilmember Hondros. Then
Tim, who initiated this youth prevention ordinance? Was this part of your comprehensive plan for community safety, or?
So yes, as I was asked what we were doing for, as an overall plan, multiple questions had come up about, how do we get accountability piece in there for the parents? If I don't have the right to get out with the kid, I don't even have the right to call their parents or anything. So the first step is having a reason to get out with a juvenile, and then based on that encounter, determining whether they're in violation of the ordinance and then contacting the parent to actually come out. So again, as questions were asked about what is accountability for parents and some of the crimes, that was the only way of me instilling some level of accountability for some parents to come out and take care, custody, and control of their children. Again, it's one of those things where, as council was asking what we're going to be doing, and it was a item of consideration that was put forth. Like I said, is something that you guys as a council will decide if you want to adopt as a city ordinance and be able to add that as a tool for the police department to utilize as we go out there and perform our duties on a nightly basis. So again, it's an item for consideration as a tool to be used by the police department to help us investigate as we have needs across our city.
Thank you, Chief. So we've discussed before that we have some vacancies, officer vacancies. I think it's 57 or somewhere thereabouts. 54? 54. Thank you, Manager Hewitt. So my question would be, if we move forward with this ordinance, even on a pilot or trial basis, do we even have the manpower and the resources?
So it's like anything else. You don't know what exactly is going to happen on that initial encounter. We may get someone, call the parents, and they show up within 5 minutes to pick up their child. They get their warning. We
Right.
document that, and they're well on the way. We may get a group of children, and now we're
Right.
stuck for the next 4 to 5 hours.
4
trying to
days.
attempt to locate and coordinating, how we're going to get them to back to. It's dependent on, I think
Unknown
the pilot
variables.
is- that's what the council chooses to do. We'll get some real world feedback on as to what the true burden would be on the police department.
Yes, Saturday, early Saturday morning, it's past 1 a.m. We do that, I don't know how we move forward with it, but that's just the comments I've received, questions and comments and reservations from citizens.
I didn't hear a clear answer. Where are these young people going to be housed? Like, are they in the lobby of the police department? Where in the building are they?
So this is no different than what we're currently doing right now when we arrest somebody for possession of a gun, a pursuit, possession of stolen vehicles right now. We have to we have to take custody of that juvenile, and they are either released to a parent or guardian, and if we're not
That's fascinating.
that is the role they play in the current process when we
Right.
have a child in custody.
Well, let me ask this now. I think it was a little misleading earlier when you talked about referring things to the Department of Juvenile Justice. If you refer to the Department of Juvenile Justice and they decide that the charge, where does it go next?
It goes to juvenile court.
Who is involved in juvenile court? Are they the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office and the Cumberland County Public Defender's Office? And again, you haven't spoken with either of those parties either?
No.
Interesting.
Like I said, this is just for your consideration. We haven't planned out the entire implementation.
Well, I'll say this as a point of order. City Manager Hewitt, the document that you sent us said to put this on the consent agenda. If right now it's not for consideration. If we do what the staff recommended, it's going to get put in as next. Moves from here? Yes, it does. Read it.
He's close. You've
No,
got
I get
30
you.
seconds.
Thank you.
Last comment, council member.
My biggest concern is that you guys are going to use this as an excuse to stop and frisk anyone that looks like they're underage. And when I think about the statistics where we only use force against one population, that canine is utilized against black men,
Instead of one of the citations be more of a child or youth having to do community service, or as far as with the parents, some type of life support skills, something that can help those parents. Because if your child, if your child is out at 1 o'clock in the morning, there's something going on in the household. That parent needs some type of resources to understand how to be a parent.
We currently offer a life skills camp through our PAL program.
Okay. Just as you mentioned, this is a tool, one tool to help helps to alleviate the gun violence. As you mentioned, like the concerns, we may face some hiccups, but it's a start. As a mother who lost a daughter, for a mother who lost a child, I wouldn't wish this on nobody. And if it takes 10 years to sit inside DSS, I would rather see that than to see a parent have to bury their child. You don't exactly. And with that being said, if there's no more questions, I do want to make a consensus.
We have a consensus motion.
Okay,
Yes,
well,
ma'am.
I hope that we can go ahead and vote.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilmember Ingram, and then McNair, and then we'll do the vote. Thank you. Councilmember Ingram.
Thank you. I do want to ask, do you have jurisdiction or authority to have access to the information that may
once we discuss it among each other later on.
All right.
During a work session.
Thank you, Councilmember Nair, and then
Yes.
I have
That is the role they play in the current process when we
Right.
have a child in custody.
Well, let me ask this now. I think it was a little misleading earlier when you talked about referring things to the Department of Juvenile Justice. If you refer to the Department of Juvenile Justice and they decide that the charge is warranted, where does it go next?
Because
Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office and the Cumberland County Public Defender's Office? And again, you haven't spoken with either of those parties either?
No.
Interesting.
Like I said, this is just for your consideration. We haven't planned out the entire implementation.
Well, I'll say this as a point of order. City Manager Hewitt, the document that you sent us said to put this on the consent agenda. So that means that if, right now, it's not for consideration. If we do what the staff recommended, it's going to get put in as a law as is. So let's be clear about that. That's what it says in the legislative text. Moves from here? Yes, it does. Read it. Read it. What does it say?
All right. Let's
So
not
let
be combative.
me finish here.
He's close. You've
No,
got
I get
30
you.
seconds.
Thank you.
Last comment, Councilmember.
My biggest concern is that you guys are going to use as an excuse to stop and frisk anyone that looks like they're underage. And when I think about the statistics where we only use force against one population, 100% of the time we point weapons at only black men. The only time that canine is utilized is against black men. How exactly are we supposed to trust that you're going to suddenly fairly apply this law when we already stop black drivers at twice the rate of white drivers, that we search black drivers at 4 times the rate of white drivers? Suddenly, this is the time that you guys are going to do things the right way?
Well, I think we're making an unfair assumption that we aren't doing things correctly or fairly.
Your statistics said that you stop drivers at what rate?
But
All
that
right.
doesn't mean
Thank
it's
you,
not-
Council Member. Thank you, Chief. Councilmember Banks McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The one thing I would like to recommend is, as far as the citation, if we can look into, instead of one of the citations be more of a community child or youth having to do community service, or as far as with the parents, some type of life support skills, something that can help, help those parents. Because if your child, this is my opinion, if your child is out at 1 o'clock in the morning, there's something going on in the household, and that parent needs some type of resources to understand how to parent.
And we currently offer a life skills camp through our PAL program.
As a tool, one tool to help to alleviate, in hopes to alleviate the gun violence. As you mentioned, like the concerns, we may face some hiccups, but it's a start. As a mother who lost a daughter, or a mother who lost a child, I wouldn't wish this on inside DSS. I would rather see that than to see a parent have to bury their child. You don't exactly. And with that being said, if there's no more question, I do want to make a consensus.
We have a
motion.
consensus motion.
Okay,
Yes,
well, then,
ma'am.
I hope that we
And
can go ahead and vote.
thank you, ma'am. Need to vote. Thank you. Councilmember Ingram.
Thank you. I do want to ask, do you have jurisdiction or authority to have access to the information that maybe principals have access to, picked up or, pulled over, or you see a child that you're able to look their information up?
No, due to juvenile confidentiality.
Once we discuss it among each other later on
All right.
during a work session.
Thank you, Councilmember Nair. And then I have Councilmember Hondros, I believe, is round one. Councilmember Benavente, your light is on. I would think that is for 1 minute, and that would be I think that's round two on this. Councilmember Hondros.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Chief, would it, or
barely apply this law when we already stop black drivers at twice the rate of white drivers, that we search black drivers at 4 times the rate of white drivers. Suddenly, this is the time that you guys are going to do things the right way?
Well, I think we're making an unfair assumption that we aren't doing things correctly or fairly.
Your statistics said that you stop drivers at what rate?
But that
All right,
doesn't mean
thank
it's
you,
not-
council member. Thank you, Chief. Council member Banks McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The one thing I would like to recommend is, as far as the citation, if we can look into possibly, instead of one of the citations to be more of a, would help, help those parents, because if your child, this is my